Hello, and welcome to another episode of Conversations about Language Teaching. I'm Dr. Diane Neubauer. My pronouns are she, her, and I am joined again by.
Dr. Reed Riggs, pronouns are he, him.
Yeah, and today we wanted to talk about teacher evaluation, specifically language teacher evaluation, but I suspect we might dive into the more general teacher evaluation that tends to happen to language teachers, sometimes in conflict with what we think are best practices for language. So we'll talk about that maybe too. But
Do we have
I wanted to
mentions?
think,
Any mentions?
oh, yes, I forgot about mentions.
Hmm.
Um, I have a tiny mention,
Yeah.
and that's that I did go ahead and buy the buttons to learn to communicate with my cat with,
Oh,
so they
how
haven't
many
come yet,
how many
but I'm in
buttons to
training.
start? How many starting?
Three.
Three buttons.
That right, six.
Mm,
Six.
mm,
But I'm
mm.
planning to use three at first.
Right.
So the
What
kit I bought, I think, has six
what will
total.
be the three words you start with?
Yeah, something the equivalent of cuddles,
Hmm.
摸摸你 in Chinese. I'm
Hmm.
using some Chinese and some English with
Hmm.
her. Treat, that's an English word I use. And then the other one will be wan, to
Hmm. To
play.
play. Hmm.
Yeah, so she loves those three things. And they say aim for concrete, easily repeatable, narrate as you're doing the thing,
Mm.
which I've already been doing.
Hmm.
And yeah, I've discovered this past few days, she also knows the words for go outside. Like I've
Hmm.
said it twice now when she has not been in the place to go outside right away.
Mm.
And she's responded to it and gone to the door where we let
Mm.
her out. So
Cool.
that's
Cool.
fun. I use that one in Mandarin as well. So it's 去外面.
Uh-huh. Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah,
These
yeah,
are
and there's
cool.
some other ones. They suggest don't, like we would say in, like we've made this point in teaching people language, like you don't have to avoid using certain words because you're like, oh, but they're not going to master it this moment.
Right.
Like if you're modeling, you're showing, you're using the language to describe the thing that you're doing right then, and you have time,
Yeah.
some time at least. And so people will ease into some words. Some words might catch faster, and they're saying the same thing from Fluent Pet. Fluent Pet is the company that I bought the buttons from,
Oh, they're made for
and that's
pets.
providing
Oh,
training.
oh,
Yeah,
neat.
yeah, they're made for um, like cat size, dog size little
Hmm.
paws, and they have
That's amazing.
recommendations about the differences between training a dog or training a cat this way.
Okay. All right. Looking forward to hearing
Yeah,
more.
yeah,
You and I had also talked about mentioning the Slay podcast blog,
yes,
and we can
yes.
link that in show notes.
They have just started a blog. I think Bill Langley, one of the Slay podcasters, particularly, is doing that blog. He is in a PhD program, and I've seen him say that this is like an outlet for him to share some of the things that are swirling around in his head as he's learning. So it's very cool. There's the post that I had read was on reading research as a teacher, and I just think he nailed it so nicely, and would
check,
really encourage people to go and look at
yeah,
and
check it
see.
out.
Yeah, he's got kind of a checklist too. So if you're about to read an article, there's sort of a way to think about what you're doing as you do that.
Yeah,
Questions to ask yourself.
that's great. Yeah, you
Hmm.
and I have talked for years about sort of a bridge metaphor, like connecting research with teachers. Connecting teachers with researchers is something I was trying to do. I don't know if I'm still trying to do it, but maybe this podcast
Hmm.
is a way. But to these are such
Well,
separate
and that
people.
that become the researcher that listens too.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, that's my strategy.
Sure, sure, sure. And also just that as I was reading research during my PhD program, a lot of the best reading I ever did was after my PhD program. I was sort of prepared to be able to read it, and then I had all this time finally. Um, so what I kept finding was that researchers kept talking about classrooms, and I understand for their purposes, they were talking about classrooms to use for research. And so it wasn't
Mhm.
really the goal
Yeah,
wasn't to get really good teaching practices in play, and not
right,
that it needs to be,
right.
but
Right. It's
that
more observational or what this does what kind
sure,
of
and those are good.
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I kept
Yeah.
thinking
When they're
was,
looking at a classroom.
yeah, but I kept thinking, I'm so aware of so many different approaches to teaching that to just grab your university students because it's what's the word?
They're
Cost effective. It's
convenient.
convenient. It's
Yes.
practical is the
They're
research
adults.
word.
They
Practicality is
can
the
sign the
research
consent
consent
form
form.
without a
Yeah,
parent.
plenty of
Hmm.
good reasons. Um, but then to say, okay, here's what happens, quote unquote, in classrooms.
Yeah.
That's really missing out on what's going on in classrooms. There's so much else going on in classrooms, and so I kept thinking, well, I would love to bring it to the awareness of researchers of how many different things go on in classrooms,
Yeah.
and then that
Exactly.
might give you better data for your goals.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. So bridge can go both ways, but this podcast I think is mainly about the one direction from research to teachers.
Yeah.
Um,
And being ourselves grounded in both
yeah,
sides of things,
yeah, as much
both
as we can
teaching and
be.
research stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of on that note,
Yeah.
well, bridging research. This one I don't think will be so much about research, more about professional practice, professional
Right.
standards, and thinking. Like how should teachers think about being evaluated, how to have some control over being evaluated, how to find
Yes.
resources and get ahead of the evaluation.
Right.
I could share a story now or later about, I think I've shared about this
Go
about,
for it.
no, I'm pretty sure I've shared it before. I was evaluated. I had made a rubric about what I do and care about, and it was pretty clear and pretty concise. I think it was adapted from Bryce Hedstrom's rubrics. Gave it to the professor who was going to evaluate me, and then Diane is stepping out. If you ever hear me say that's me saying yes. Diane can step away for a moment. Um, so then this professor came in and at the end of the evaluation left my evaluation paper blank on my desk, and then later in the day
Yeah.
emailed me her evaluation, and it was a lot of just
Yeah.
scathing stuff. And so then I just thought,
Yeah.
not only are your comments not aligned with what I'm trying to do,
Right.
I
Didn't
I
even talk
I
about those.
no,
Oh,
and I yeah, and you ignored the stuff I said I wanted to do, and so I understand um, aligning with what your administrators want. But also at the end of the day, this person was not a pedagogy person. This was in my university, and she was a very formal linguist, like a Chomsky formal
mm,
linguist, and asking about things that seemed like very traditional pedagogy that I just like didn't care about as a
yeah.
proficiency-based communicative teacher. So
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah. Sometimes we can write off like, okay, you're saying that because you're coming from a very different paradigm,
yeah,
and we might not have a place to agree on this.
yeah,
If I tell you my goal is this and you're not saying anything about how am I meeting that goal,
yeah,
then maybe we're,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
if
It
we're all
was
saying our goal is communication and the development of our students' language and intercultural ability,
sure,
then
but she
maybe we have a
wasn't.
place to
Yeah.
critique. But yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, she's not
none of it was
interested.
that. No. So
Yeah.
I think that my solution going forward was to well, in those days, just finish my PhD program and teach
Yes.
my university classes as best I could. We had a textbook I had to follow. But nowadays I try to talk to my administrators as much as possible about
Yeah.
what our needs as a language department are.
Yeah. And I find not necessarily, but there has at least been lip service with the administrators that I've worked with when I was a K to 12 teacher. Like they sometimes they know that they don't know. And
Yeah.
sometimes they're even a little bit intimidated or frightened by the fact that they have to evaluate a language teacher. And they're if you're using the language in the classroom, they're going to know, like, I don't understand. I actually had a classroom job that was guest services, and I've seen other teachers do this too. I think it came out of Ben Slavik's professional learning community somewhere. Somebody suggested this as a student job. So if you had somebody come in and evaluate you, that you had a student who was like, "Oh, welcome to our class. Here, sit near me. I can help you understand what we're doing as we go through the class. Ask me any questions. Maybe sometimes I'll just tell you, a sentence or two about what we're doing right now."
That's so
Because
funny.
we're
That
going
is
to
so
be
funny.
way in the target language. And I had somebody do that for an administrator who came in on a surprise visit for me. And I was so glad I had set that up with a student. And the administrator actually was like, kind of like, no, 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 don't do anything. But I think she needed it, frankly.
Okay.
I mean, I taught Chinese. She was not, if I were a Spanish teacher or even a French teacher, maybe she could catch some cognates or she'd see words that she could read. I mean, we did not have that. So we really had to help bridge the gap, I felt. Um, one of the times where that did work, I was getting my teacher certification. And so this involved having a mentor teacher. Even though I was already teaching, I was at an independent school. I didn't need the teaching certification for the state that I worked in at the time, Illinois. I was earning my Wisconsin teacher certification. And one of the deals with that was I invited one of my like my colleagues at the grade level, another of the sixth grade team of teachers who was a social studies teacher. And I liked her a lot and I thought she was great and insightful about kids and would be straight with me and like we could talk about it. And she knew she was going to have to come into my Chinese class and evaluate. And by that time, I was using a lot of the target language. And she was like, I could see on her face as she walked in, like, I'm uncomfortable. And so I handed her the first of one of the rubrics I wanted to talk about. It's Bryce Hedstrom shares freely on his website a teacher evaluation rubric. I think would be a great starting place. Like I've taken it and adapted it. I think at the time I might have just used his rubric directly. But it was like I showed her this one page, easily formatted, nice little thing, like, use of the target language. Let me see. I'll actually refer to his
Okay.
document because I've got it open.
Mm.
So it's a checklist for observing a world language classroom. Target language use is the first category, and there's three subpoints. There's best practice world language teaching methods. So it's about student attention, active engagement, held accountable for the lesson. And then there's little spots to check. Actually, quite a few of those for student engagement. And then effective classroom management techniques towards the end. And then some note space at the bottom. He notes on his document, this is copyright 2022 and original by Susan Gross, adapted with permission. So
Oh,
Susan
nice.
Gross is the root of this. She
Great.
was really instrumental in helping get teacher training on TPRS in
Mhm.
some of its original format, like in the 90s and into the early 2000s.
I've heard her name a lot. Is she still active? Okay.
She has retired. I got to meet her
Oh.
and was trained with her once. I was
Hmm.
in her last training. So she was officially retired, but she had come to Hyun Lo's school outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Mm. Very cool.
And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I got to meet her again in Agen too. She came in and sat in on my Chinese class for a day.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Um, Additionally, so I've had success recently. I was in some. I'm these in the IB system. We call it subject area lead. It's a department chair, essentially. And so I was in meetings with my deans recently, who were talking about various needs in the language department. Our biggest need right now is placement, but it keeps touching on all these other issues like placement, but placement into this. But our teachers ready to support students? Well, they would need some support. Okay, well, so what we started to come up with was some of the deans were saying I would like to be able to observe teachers and see that they're following standards. But then I
Mm,
noticed that when the deans were talking about this, they were making up their own standards. And
yeah,
I
see,
said, hold on, wait.
good,
We
good for
have
you.
specific
Yeah,
standards in our
I,
field, and I highly recommend you
yeah.
look into the Tell project because
Mhm.
what I like about it is it's huge and comprehensive, and you
Yep.
can choose within it. So that led to this and that and this and that, and then now where we're at is the teachers themselves. I've met with them at a subject area meeting and said, these are the Tell standards. What I like is that it's specific to our subject area so we can educate the deans on what we do. And we can choose from it what we want to start with as our selected criteria. We don't have to start with the entire thing. It's so comprehensive. I've pulled it up here.
Yeah,
So it's
I've
got,
got it open too.
okay, so these domains, the environment domain, and it's about like a friendly space, intercultural thinking. It's the biggest category. It's just general and broad. Students walk into a classroom that feels like there's relationships and community. Planning, so that's just all these little checklists
Yeah,
for the teacher planning process.
yeah.
Then there's the
I like
learning
the phrasing
experience.
here. I plan for lessons that contain learning experiences designed to keep all students engaged all the time.
Sure. Yep.
So that's, yeah.
So that's just a piece of it, and then but within each of these, there's this very detailed checklist, and then each main category has little little descriptors. There's a whole lot of wording in there, and it's kind of easy to glance at. But then there's learning experience, then there's performance and feedback, then there's learning
Hmm.
tools, and then there's two more about the teacher themselves. Is collaboration. Do you collaborate with colleagues? Lots of descriptors in there. And then
Hmm.
professionalism. Do you continue to go out, like maybe to PD and get trained?
Yeah,
So
nice.
it covers
Yeah.
everything. Yeah,
Well, and then there's a column too that says my goal. So,
Mm.
like, you could pick one of these lines, like, I regularly use evidence of student growth to inform reflection on my practices. You can have that as, like, this is a thing I want to really work on. So
yeah, yeah.
that's nice too.
So
Now,
the teachers are
can
teachers are
I?
choosing from it, and so
Yeah,
the teachers have agency too. And I think that's a
yeah,
big piece to this is that teachers should feel not that the standards are being imposed on them, but that they're working on the goals they want to work on in the moment. And so it's a
yeah.
nice set. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, I think there is a little bit of a
Sure.
prescriptiveness
Yeah,
that
yeah,
I
yeah.
think does align with
Sure.
ACTFL's
Yeah.
things. Like
Yeah.
this used to have on this rubric, and I see that it's changed and I like it. So under the category, I ensure that students receive comprehensible input. One point is I ensure that at least 90% of what I say and or materials I share with my students are in the target language. I like that it's not demanding no use of other languages. I think we need to be more flexible than that. I think that, yeah, I like that it's not demanding of students. Like, I've heard of teachers being evaluated by their students' behavior regarding the target language and target language use. And I feel like that's interfering with student autonomy. Like, we can encourage and, model, like, make the target language really a normal thing that we use to communicate in the classroom. And I totally support that. Where I've sometimes seen it where it gets to be a little bit of a language policing on the student and or on the teacher, and rather than like, wow, we're here to really maximize our target language proficiency development, and we'll use all the languages we know to get there. Like, that's the attitude I would rather have than like, we have, oh, somebody said this word in that named language. Oh, that's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this does avoid that, but I always have this looking on there. It did used to phrase it a little less flexibly, and I like this phrasing much better.
There used to be a phrasing,
Um,
and I still see this sometimes, and I feel like I saw it recently, and I'm suspicious that they changed it like between when I saw it, and
really.
it was something to the old way of saying the teacher never translates, something like that. And I still see that in various
Yes.
places from
Yeah.
time to time. The teacher never translates. Um, and I actually went to my dean with two books. It was the Oxford. There's a book published by Oxford and a book published by Cambridge. The Oxford one is sort of a researcher think piece by Hall on the use of translation in English teaching. And then
Yeah.
Cambridge has a book that's a teacher activity book. It's like a handbook for language teachers full of activities that's just like translation games, translation activities, like productive uses of translation in the classroom. So I brought those to
Hmm.
school to give to her and say, I know we're looking at TEL standards. When you look at this one piece that says never ever translate, please be aware that like that's the
Hmm.
one piece I disagree with. That
Yeah.
if it's purposeful and you have a plan, then you're all good. Also, translation is often something that students who learn a language want to do for work or want to do when they travel, like translating for family. There are functional uses to not even being a professional translator, like just on the fly translating something. It's not something to poo-poo. It is something to push away from in this unproductive way where the teacher will say a bunch of stuff, translate all of it, say a bunch of new stuff, translate all of it. Like that's extremely unhelpful.
Hmm.
But the idea of knocking down any kind of translation, I think, is misguided. But so then I went back and looked at the TEL standards, and it wasn't there. And so
Hmm.
I
Interesting.
don't know what happened.
It
Maybe I was
changed.
looking at
Yeah.
an
It's
old
been a
form.
recent,
Yeah.
more flexible shifting, I think, by some. Yeah.
Yeah,
We're
it's great.
getting there. Like,
Making it work.
yes, target language use, critical, important,
Absolutely.
needs to
Yeah.
be comprehensible, communicative, like we're doing
Yeah.
something with the language, we're not just repeating language.
Yeah.
But yeah, also we can be a little more flexible about it. So I think that's
Yeah.
good.
No, it's
Yeah.
good.
One of the interesting things I found when I was doing a search for the TEL rubric is, are you ready for a little slight shift? Next step of the, yeah, because one of the problems of language teachers can be like you pointed out, somebody who has different goals, or like in my situation, a very friendly evaluator who didn't know what to look for because she wasn't a language teacher. So she didn't have any of those possibilities on her radar. The Massachusetts has developed a thing where they have the general state teacher rubric and then the teacher effectiveness for language learning, the TEL project rubric. And they have a whole resource guide of 22 pages available online. Of course, we're going to be linking these things, but this is a resource guide for, as it says, identifying high quality world language teaching as described by the TEL project and in alignment with the Massachusetts Educator evaluation system. And I glanced through the Massachusetts general education, teacher evaluation, and it's like curriculum and planning, teaching all students, family and community engagement, interestingly, and professional culture. And so those are great. Those are things that we really do share across education with other content areas. And then they have the teacher effectiveness for language learning, the TEL project rubric for specifics to language. And then this guide kind of helps people learn how to do both. And they start out with self-assessment. You want to self-assess yourself against the proficient, not against the exceeding or beyond, but the proficient level of the rubric, and then set some goals and think about mentoring and coaching. So this sounds like a very, like you're pointing out, like this is needs to have teacher choice, teacher goals, teacher self involvement rather
Yep.
than a top-down pressure thing. But like, oh, here are things that are important in both any teaching and then in language teaching, and then how do we go up from there? So
Yeah.
I suspect that Catherine Ritz is a big part of why that is in Massachusetts, but
Mm,
I could be
okay.
wrong.
Yes.
But I know she's in Massachusetts somewhere, doing a lot with use of the target language, teacher effectiveness, teacher development and growth. She has research on those things. So try to link to some of what she's done too.
That's great. Another one that I was shown at the recent Southwest Conference on Language Teaching is the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce.
Yeah.
And they have model curriculum and instructional support. So we can link that in show notes. What I noticed in there, it was similar to what we've said so far, plus they had these intercultural standards that were very,
Mhm.
very well laid out. And I thought that's nice to have that laid out in
Yes.
rubrics. Now, a lot of those are student facing, not evaluating the teacher. Um, but
They're
just,
food for reflection for the teacher. Like, how am I aiming for these things with my
mhm,
students?
yeah,
And if you're not actually, even if you are a native speaker of your target language, of the language you're teaching, I think those are food for your own thought as you're an intercultural person, regardless of whether you're in your home country teaching your home language or, combination of things.
yeah,
We're all trying to model that kind of intercultural learning too. So,
yeah,
are we doing it ourselves
yeah.
is part of the evaluation, I think. Self-evaluation.
Yeah. Well, self-evaluation also, we in our school we do PGP goals, personal growth progress goals, and so each teacher sets two at the beginning of the year, follows up with meetings with the dean, one-on-one meetings to talk about how we've been progressing in it. Usually it's some sort of, you choose something. It's like this year I want to read a book on assessment. Okay, so what are you learning from it? It's sort of
Yeah.
self-paced, self-guided professional development.
Yeah.
What the deans haven't ever been able to guide us to is language specific, like language teacher specific resources. It's left up to us to find them. I think that, and this, I don't mean to knock anybody. Um, I think that it's useful to have something like TEL standards or another state standards or something like this that gives you a bigger menu to choose from. A single book is fine, and a single book is something that can be looked at. I kept ending up with books that were for general IB things, like there's an inquiry-based book, and what I did, I found myself immediately saying, okay, I'm not sure how to apply these like science teaching things. I have been finding
Hmm.
recently, as a side note, that lesson plans that are like little example lesson plans or example lesson materials for lower grades, like kindergarten, first and second grade,
Mm,
I often find them more readily adaptable for language teaching.
totally
com
makes sense.
compared to things where it's like science for high school kids, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. But
Yep.
if it's science for a first grader, I'm like, oh, actually, this
Yeah.
looks like
Well,
the
like
language.
a lot of the world language teaching strategies, like if you do special person interview, to mention Bryce Hedstrom, he's
Yeah,
very well known for
yeah.
developing that and doing training on that. On calendar talk kinds of things where these are things that are homeroom teacher strategies out of the kindergarten and early elementary grades,
Right.
where you are reducing the language load
Yeah.
because these are kids that are still developing the language of the classroom, even if
Hmm.
they've heard it from birth.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that totally makes sense. I mentioned it, I'm teaching a lot of elementary education majors. And those are the places where I feel like, yep, I get what you're doing there because
Yeah.
we're developing a classroom learning community through the use of language
Yeah.
together and, developing the students' literacy bit by bit as we go up there with a lot of teacher modeling. And it's interactive for sure,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's
Well,
really quite
yeah.
interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
going through these books, I kept finding that I would jump to the index at the back and look for language or world language, and I would just find the little section about it. But the book overall was giving too many examples that weren't immediately useful to me. And so what I
Mhm.
like about something like Tell is that if you say, choose your PGP goals from this, now
Yeah.
your territory. Like this is
Mhm.
where everything is relevant to you. And then you
Yeah.
can not only choose like one thing to grow to focus on for your growth for the year, but then you have a bunch of other back burner questions and goals for yourself to be like, maybe next year, I'm not ready for this yet, but maybe next year I could start working on this other thing that's specific to language teaching. So I find that
Hmm.
that experience is far different from a book with one section that's relevant to me and the rest that's just not at all. It would take
Yeah.
a lot of creativity that really isn't, I don't see it's worth the
Yeah.
effort. Like my students don't need a full-on science class in high school that is teaching them things that they're already learning in another class. Maybe the
Hmm.
value could, and I know that dual immersion does this with lower grades, but the goal for me would be something like review. I was sitting in study hall, it's about 4 years ago, watching students learning some math concept in ninth grade. And then I tried repeating it on slides in Mandarin, and immediately they're
Hmm.
like, "No, we don't want more of this." Like, "No, no, no,
Like, please, no more math.
we already don't like it in our math class." I was like, "Okay,
Yeah.
all right,
Yeah.
okay,
But I think some of the content that we end up teaching in a world language classroom is related to the target language communities,
the culture, yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
culture, the
yeah,
different environments, comparisons of culture,
hmm
comparisons of things. Yeah. So we can, to some degree, we can borrow in some of those strategies when we're thinking of learning something
sure,
about, yeah. But then we have to convert it to now my students' language proficiency is an issue. I think the thing for me
yeah,
in getting more connected to multilingual education, to the English as a second language kind of experience in the US, is that it's always that. It's always about both content learning and
yeah,
language learning, and being able to manage both at once is challenging.
hmm
But it does give a purpose to the language, and it gives a coherent context for whatever you're doing with language. So it's yeah, there's a lot to borrow from that too. I'm feel like I'm learning from the way that people who teach a content area and have to adapt to all different
yeah,
kinds of levels of multilingual
yeah,
learners,
yeah,
like the flexible way that they're thinking and the way that they're doing scaffolding,
hmm
and a lot of checks, frequent checks of like, okay, where are these students, that student, and honestly, being a little bit of a looser hand than you can be in a world language classroom where you happen to know these are students without a background in the language, which
sure,
is not always the case in a world language classroom, of course.
yeah,
We have heritage speakers or kids who come in with other experiences
yeah,
learning that language. So we really should be thinking more with differentiation in mind, I think, in world
absolutely,
language sometimes.
sure.
But all that to say,
The
like
yeah.
looking into some of those could really be good ways to think about like, okay, how am I doing this professionally? How do I really know that my students understood me? Like I
Yeah.
feel like they have a more rigorous
I think
set of
that
practices
it's a
for that.
little like what we started the episode about the cat, that you already know what the action goals are for the cat. It's like you want to play, you want to go outside, What was the other one you're going to start with?
Eat,
Eat. Yeah, obviously.
get
So,
snuggles.
and snuggles. There you go. And you already know what those are. And that's something similar that's going on in a common elementary education classroom. They
Yeah.
have to learn how to, there's like all these standards, learn how to count money. They have to learn how to subtract. They have to like, you have all these learning
Hmm.
goals that will be mediated through language,
Yep.
but the language is not the goal, and it's not put on a calendar. It's not put on like you have to know these words by this date. There's a bit of
Right.
that, and I've noticed teachers will say that. So I'll say like, "Hey, there's so much language use, that's how they're growing." And they say, "Well, we clap along with syllables, and they learn how to count syllables in a word." Yeah,
Hmm.
you do, and I do think that has an impact. I do see the kids like pointing out. My daughter points out syllables all the time now. She's like, "How many
Hmm.
claps is that?" It does have an impact, but it would be useless and meaningless and impactless if they didn't have a ton of acquired language and they weren't
Right.
constantly being
Something to hang on
exposed
that.
to English all the time.
Yeah.
Your mod
Yeah.
it's like you're giving them a bunch of clay and then showing them how to shape the clay. But without the input, without the constant
Yeah.
exposure to English, you're not giving them any clay to work with. Like
Right.
we keep ignoring that bigger piece, which is the constant exposure. But
Yes.
in the content that they're learning in a lower elementary class, the language is mediating these other goals, these content and skills goals. So it's something to take back to world language is I think it's usually culture
Hmm.
and how to talk about yourself, how to do work tasks maybe.
Right.
But
Yeah. The self-reflection about like
yeah,
how you're encountering this new language and new cultural settings and stuff
yeah.
too.
So these are things that teachers I
Mhm.
think can. But kind of thought of another metaphor that if a teacher is looking to general language standards, sorry, not language, general teaching rubrics or general
Yeah. Like
teaching
the
things.
Danielson rubric or something like
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it would be a little bit like if they're like, well, here's an example from a science class, language teachers, you can just adapt this. It's a little like saying you can jump in a swimming pool to learn baseball. You just got to get really creative. And I'm like,
Yes.
uh, that's a lot of creativity, and it's really not showing me
And we've
like
got a field over here that would
any,
be really good for the
yeah.
baseball
And the
game. Can
field
we try it there?
exists. Yeah, the field already
Yeah.
exists. Can I be in my subject area? And vice
Right.
versa. The kids have to
Yeah.
learn baseball. They'll just, the water will create some resistance like a baseball. They just got to get creative. That's creativity beyond. You're asking us to like reinvent an entire field. If you're,
Right.
hey, field literally. That's a good metaphor there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that it's nice to know that there are language teacher specific rubrics,
Hmm.
or if you're, an early elementary ed teacher, that you should find your standards and guides to your field, have
Right.
some choice within it, and also communicate with your
Right.
administrators. Show them that, like bring that to them,
Yes.
or ask
Yeah.
if they know about
I
it.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation recently with a math educator that I work with. And she was talking about, well, there's these evaluations of teachers that are just treating every subject area the same. And in math, we need something different. And I thought, like,
Yeah, welcome to the
wow,
club. Yeah.
okay, good, good. I'm glad that other people in other subject areas do recognize that there are times where the general practice that somebody might call a best practice is maybe we need to think about, okay, the goal right here with the students with this kind of circumstance and background and proficiency and all that, like one of the ones that is kind of an axiom that's used about teachers is like, be a guide on the side, not a sage on the stage. And then they look at a language teacher who's talking to students, and maybe the students are giving minimal responses because they're novices.
Yeah.
This is another
Yeah.
one of those things
Hmm.
with multilingual learners that is a little different because they so quickly move from those initial stages of novice level that they are really quickly up in novice high, like they're producing sentences.
Yeah.
They're doing phrases really confidently. They're starting to get to lists of sentences. Like those are pretty fast movements for people who are surrounded by the language all the time. But in world language, if you're having such a limited amount of time, we're really helping somebody understand those initial stages of language acquisition, I think is really a worthwhile conversation, both for you as a teacher to really get that, And so that like my students are capable, they are good thinkers, and yet they don't have much expressive language ability. And so we're going to accommodate that with a whole bunch of strategies, but we're not going to like, not do something meaningful. We're not going to do nothing here, but
Yeah.
we're going to accommodate the language proficiency and helping somebody else who walks into your classroom see that. Like, so, I'm allowing my students to really think deeply about a photograph. I'm going to use the panda thing because it comes to my mind so readily. Like we're looking, yes, we're just looking at a panda, and I'm asking them, is it a panda? But three photos down, where they're now seeing a day-old panda, where they're like, wait a minute, is it?
Is it a
They're
panda? Yeah.
they're having to turn some wheels and draw on their background knowledge and make some predictions. And they're doing deeper, higher order thinking with very simple language available. And so, helping somebody evaluate, recognize that,
Right.
and helping yourself as a teacher, like go, oh, I can keep language accessible to novices and yet touch on these deeper areas of learning or
The
thinking or
content. Sure.
comparing or
Skills.
predicting or
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, some of those higher order things.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, absolutely.
because I think that is valuable. I mean, it's more engaging when we're not just, repeat after me stuff or
Sure.
gamifying. I think there's a place for all of those things, but it's it's not the whole. And so,
Oh
doing
yeah,
something
and
that's more
actually on
rich
that
is
note,
better.
defining engagement is something that
Hmm.
observers, evaluators
100%.
really could use some different like some specification on. So like if the students are jumping around and like super excited because they're jumping around, they're catching a
Right.
ball or they're slapping a fly swatter game, that's not necessarily engagement with comprehending, with communication and interpretive,
Yeah. That's
interpersonal or
excitement,
expressive
maybe. I wish there
modes.
was
Yeah.
another term that gets used for that. Like it could pay off. Like Sarah Breckley is a Spanish teacher who's pointed out, like, hey, we do this so that they care about the other stuff.
Okay,
And
that's
like we
fair.
need to meet them
Yeah,
where they are. Absolutely.
sure.
But it's not, don't predict that, oh, excitement from these students means learning is happening. That's not
Right.
an equivalent. You got to dig into what is it that they're excited about? What are they encountering in order to engage here?
Are
And
they showing engagement with the use of the language? Because
yeah,
that's really meeting the goal of the language
yeah.
classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's not just all the louder excitement or loud talking, sometimes deep thinking
yeah,
or emotional engagement is an engagement
yeah,
too. So it could be an internal thing that you don't observe as easily
yeah.
until you have a free write 2 weeks from now.
Yeah,
Or
you and I were
yeah.
looking at in a data session. We were looking at a video of a student in a summer classroom, and she was kind of playing with her back. She looked like she was messing with her backpack. Like she looked disengaged by any common definition of disengagement. She no eye contact, looking down at the ground, touching her backpack, and then out of nowhere, she raises her hand. Teacher calls on her, and she makes this big, long offering toward the story about where Batman was instead of being where he is in the current place in the story. And the teacher's like, "Oh, that's a pretty good idea. We're going to do this other thing with Batman, though." But she showed that she was
High engagement.
tracking. She was very much listening to what the teacher was saying and trying to get her mind together to offer this idea to the story. So,
Right.
really, you don't want to just look in any moment and say, haha, there. Like right in that
Right.
moment, the
You have
student was
to,
disengaged. Like, no, hold on. Look in the longer run.
yes.
What?
That's
Yeah.
another challenge of evaluation because you maybe had 10 minutes walk through kind of an evaluation. That's usually the length of time I had, maybe 15 minutes.
Yeah.
They, yeah, knowing that those evaluations, like knowing if you get them, like they had a little snapshot, they had to pick something that's an area of growth, so it'll sound negative. Just go, okay,
Right.
that's part of the deal.
Right.
You know,
All right.
they
Well,
didn't see everything.
we're out of time on the recording. I think we've
Yes.
done a good job with this topic.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. We'll
Everybody,
see you next time.
yeah, thanks for listening.